In order for things to make you stronger, you have to grieve them. When we go through a painful situation, if we circumvent the grieving process and go right to, it made me stronger, it didn't really make you stronger. You just shut down your heart more. So welcome to this week's podcast. I feel like so many of us have been in these transitional, changing type seasons. I feel like one of the things that can be very widely missed when we're going through transition is truly understanding what the winds of change mean. Really and truly understanding how to navigate this time of transition. It was interesting because I just led a certification training for grief recovery. And so I'm training people to be grief recovery specialists. And there was somebody on there that said, I heard Cole's podcast and there was a gentleman talking about retirement being a grieving experience. And that really opened me up. And it's what made me want to do this training. By the way, just a special plug, Cole, who's the president of the Grief Recovery Institute, does have a podcast. It's called the Feel Free Again podcast. And so it's all around grief and loss. He interviews different specialists in all different walks of life, in different seasons. And so if this is a topic that you would like more information on, I just want to encourage you to go and listen or watch. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify. And that was just a plug. He didn't ask me to do that, but I just know there's valuable content on there. And as the person in the training, as she said that, it really started to hit me that so many times what we miss when we're in change and flux and transition, we miss the reality that is happening within our hearts. I think too often we only think of painful experiences just being those things that are bad. Just our hard things, our bad things, those are losses. That's where we grieve. But the truth is, change in and of itself is a major grieving experience. It was dawning on me today that often when we're transitioning, and I mean that transition of season, I think a lot of people have been feeling it where life has gotten hard or life has gotten unpredictable, or I feel like new things are coming into my life. And yet I was wondering and I was reflecting on why is it that so often those seasons are kind of long. I mean, I feel like many people have been in this very long, drawn out transitional season. And even though the Lord may move in a sudden breakthrough, the truth is the transition often takes a very long time. And it finally hit me that our nature, so naturally, we resist change. Naturally, we grab the familiar. And the reason that we do that is because we're all designed and created to want safety and security. I mean, think about it. Think about what it was like in the garden. Think about how people existed in the garden before the fall. It was so secure. I mean, they never had to worry. They weren't anxious. They weren't worried about the future. They weren't worried about food. They weren't worried about those things. They weren't worried that somebody was going to hurt them. I mean, imagine that before sin. And our original design is there. Our original design is walking in the garden, shoulder to shoulder with God, day in and day out. That's what we were designed for, which is why that's what we're returning to when we go to heaven. And so because of that, our natural design is we desire security. And what happens in our world, in our today, is that translates to the familiar. We crave the familiar. Even people that are risk takers and entrepreneurs and people that seem to really get a charge out of doing crazy things, even those people, when it comes to the nucleus of their life, will still tell you that there is a rhythm behind the scenes. There is a familiarity when it comes to people, relationships, life position that they still maintain, even though they may be exhibiting behaviors. And, I think about people that like ride bikes down these mountains. And every time I see a camera on one of those, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. But even them, there is still a level of security and familiarity in their lives. And the same is for us. We desire it. And there's a God-given desire in that. But as a result of the fall and as a result of the world that we live in and the families that we grew up in and the society that we're in, we often crave the familiar. And so we don't want to leave it. And so what happens in our transitions is they need to be prolonged. They need to be longer. And the reason they need to be longer is because we often have to release the old in order to step into the new. Oftentimes, even when there is a suddenly from the Lord, it is because he has been gradually preparing us to hold what he has already done. But we don't talk about this whole idea of grief and change often enough. I have a dear friend who just moved, and I'm sad. I'm sad that she moved because I loved having her close by, and she's such a wonderful, wonderful friend. But of course, I have a new place to visit. But she was leaving a place where she had lived for many years. And even though this new adventure and this new place that she's moved to in some ways is much more of what she's always wanted, what a grieving experience. It's leaving the familiar and going into the unknown. And anytime we do that, our resistance often comes because we're hanging on to the familiar. And a lot of times it is the heart saying, there are things that I don't want to let go of. We don't really often understand the pain around transition and change of any kind. We never talk about getting married as a grieving experience, but did you know that it is? It often brings conflicting feelings. There's often the excitement, but there's also the fear. There's the big change in life that happens when we get married or when we have a child, right? These are situations in our life that bring about drastic change. Sobriety is another one, but we never think about that. We never think about, oh, a big change like retirement or empty nest. Those things are grieving experiences. This podcast is called Reflections of the Father's Heart because it's all about really understanding the heart of the Father. And in part, we also, in order to do that, have to understand the design of our own heart. We have to realize that we live in a world, in a society, even in our Christian circles, in a place where we often don't learn the waters of our heart. The heart is the most attacked part of our being. The heart is often stuffed down and made to be something that we don't even look at. Emotions are just bad. And it's so far from the experience that the Lord has given us. Your heart is what helps you to navigate life. Your heart is what helps you to experience life and life to the full. That abundant life that the Lord has promised is not experienced through the head. It's experienced through the heart. The connections that we make with people, the way that passion lights up within us, the way that the Holy Spirit imprints within us, that's all the waters of our heart. And it's important that we learn them. A lot of times when we are going from one place to the other, that transition is a major grieving experience. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever realized that when things change, we want to hang on to the familiar? Did you ever think about when we're going from one place to the other, whether it's vocationally or spiritually or emotionally or relationally? We don't realize it, but that change, that road, that journey, it brings grief. And too often our hearts become unacknowledged. You know, there's statistics out there and people kind of know it, that it's not uncommon for someone to retire and then have this experience where their health starts to decline. They start to become very sedentary, very distracted. And it's often said, wow, you know, they really need to take on another project and they need to keep really busy. And maybe there's some truth in that, but I really believe that the other part of it is it's a significant life change. Retirement is huge. You're going from having a certain workplace, which brings a certain identity and a certain structure to life that is drastically changed when you retire. If people understood that and were able to embrace the areas of their heart that are wrestling with the change, they would be able to walk through the other side. And I believe have a much better retirement than if they just go into retirement, because we think of retirement as, well, it's something to really celebrate. It's like people work just so they can retire, not recognizing that that drastic change often brings something within the heart that is very emotional. And yet people don't have language or tools to be able to grieve that. The winds of change are here for so many. And the winds of change bring transition, and the transition brings grief. And if we don't learn how to acknowledge grief and how to really and embrace our hearts, embrace and then release the pain, we can get stuck. I love so many of the biblical characters, right? So many of the people in the Bible that had these very long transitions. I grab onto them. I look at Joseph. I mean, talk about all of the change that Joseph had to experience. He had this vision, right? He had this vision, and it was a vision from God. And he said, he told his family, basically my parents, my brothers, they're all going to bow down to me. And of course the brothers were jealous and angry. And who does he think he is? And so they sold him into slavery and told his father that he must have gotten attacked by a wild animal and was no longer living. And his father, of course, was distraught. And then Joseph spent years going through things. He was put in prison. He was left there for years. And then finally, because of his ability to interpret dreams, and even after interpreting the dreams for the cupbearer and the baker, it still took years before he was remembered. And then the Pharaoh elevates him to this position. But what I love about what we get to see and hear from Joseph is Joseph was comfortable in his heart. When he finally met his brothers again and they didn't know who he was, that's how Egyptian he looked at the time. It's like he went in the other room. He was overcome with emotion. And it was like he was weeping so loudly that others outside the room heard him. And I truly believe that part of Joseph's transition was just that. He really grabbed that emotive experience, and he was able to be comfortable with expressing himself. And then later, after Jacob had died, Joseph's brothers send word to them. This is all in the book of Genesis. They send word to him saying, "We just want you to know," I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but it's basically like, "Our father, before he died, said that you need to forgive us." And it says that Joseph wept bitterly right in that moment. He was so distraught and so upset and hurt that his brothers, after all these years, it had been, I think, about 17 years, after all these years, believed that he was still hanging on to what they had done to him. He truly embraced his heart. I've talked about this many times, but look at David's journey. Look at the time he was anointed and how long before he became king. And yet the man after God's own heart who made so many mistakes. I mean, we know of Bathsheba, but there were many others. There were many other things that he did. But what did he learn to do? He learned to grieve. He was a man after God's own heart because he was emotionally honest. He was emotionally honest, and it really helped him, I truly believe, with the transition. Because how would David have been able to step into kingship if he had not embraced his heart in the transition? And of course, I think our best model of all is Jesus. How emotionally honest Jesus was. When he came and was going to raise Lazarus and he saw all the people grieving, and it says he wept. And when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's saying, "Father, if it's possible, please take this cup from me, but not your will, but not my will, but your will be done." He was in so much distress that he was dripping blood, like he was sweating blood. He was honest. The times he would, the bits that we have, even the way that he would cry out to his father, the way that he prayed for the people that followed him. It was very much emotive and grieving. And I think what's really important is, the scriptures do say that for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Or when he came to raise Lazarus, he purposely waited until Lazarus had died before making the journey. So he knew he was going to raise him from the dead. I believe that Jesus walked in a lot of transition. I can't even imagine the tension that he must have been in, walking this earth, being in this ministry that he was in, loving people as deeply as he did, but also knowing that ultimately he was walking toward sacrifice for us. And if he modeled that emotional honesty, that truth, then why wouldn't we want to walk that way? I believe that a lot of our wrestle in transition is holding on to what's familiar. Did you know that by acknowledging our conflicting feelings around what's happening and expressing them, that we grieve, and grieving helps us to release the familiar to step into what is unknown? We don't talk about this, you all. We don't look at our lives this way. Sometimes we've been in a season where there's been people that God has moved us away from and people that God has moved us to be with. And I know for me, I have to be very, very diligent about making sure that I'm grieving those relationships that maybe I'm not as close to anymore, so that I can fully embrace the ones that the Lord has now put in my life. Because one of the things that happens for us when we have a lot of unresolved pain is that we start to get very self-protective. We become very fearful, because painful experiences, leaving the familiar, having a relationship that we thought was a forever relationship only be a seasonal one, a betrayal where somebody that we looked up to did something egregious and now it's betrayed our trust. The way that we often show up is fear. That causes fear. Why? Because we were made for the garden. We weren't made for the fall. The immense amount of emotional pain that we experience on this side of the fall is not something that we want to repeat. Immediately, what happens is our defense mechanisms go up to say, oh, I am going to make sure that I never experience that kind of pain again. And that is deepened and furthered by the pile up of things that we carry inside. It's that backpack where now it's filled up with pebbles and rocks and boulders, and this other rock goes in. And what happens inside is we become very self-protective, because it's like, I will never let that happen to me again. And you may not be consciously thinking that, but that's what happens within. You may find yourself numbing out more. You may find yourself isolating more, shutting down more, or just not being as joyful as you normally were before. And that is an indicator that you're self-protecting, because there's things in your backpack. Sometimes in order to release the familiar and step into the unknown, we have to grieve what we've lost and what we're losing, even if where we're stepping into is better. We all know this. Anytime the Lord calls us on a journey and calls us to take this new path, of course it's going to be better. But we have to realize that grieving is a part of the process. You know, I know in kind of charismatic circles, I've seen people that they'll kind of go from meeting to meeting, looking for that break, that breakthrough, that miracle, that aha, that epiphany. And it's not that they never get them. I mean, we know the Holy Spirit works in that way, in breakthroughs and in miracles, but we often miss that what may be holding us back is that we're still carrying unresolved pain from our last season. And a lot of times, even further, what we don't realize is just the transition itself, even into a breakthrough, is a grieving experience. I remember when I got divorced, and it was a journey. You know, I never thought I would get divorced. And I remember moving out, and I remember waking up the first morning in the Airbnb going, I think I might be going through a divorce. Even though at that time we were just separated, I could sense it. And living in that Airbnb, and it was in a nice area, but it was very kind of small and dark. And I didn't have my animals, and I so wanted my animals. And then finally I moved out near this area, and I'm living in an apartment, and then I had my animals, and I just was praying every day that I really wanted to live in a home. Partly because the place that I was living in, the apartment I was living in, the area was just not that great. I didn't realize it when I rented it, but I'm there and I'm with my dogs, and all I wanted was a house. And then it came, it happened. And oh my goodness, I was amazed at how much I grieved when I moved into this home. It was such a significant change. And I had this familiar, even the house that I co-owned with my ex-husband, it was a cute house. It was smaller. It was a different area. I moved into this home, and it was like, I don't know how to hold this season. I don't know how to hold this. I'm grieving. I've left something familiar, something that I didn't realize I had gotten so comfortable with, into something where now I'm in this home, and being in the home kind of raised new levels of grief within of, oh, and I'm not married, and oh, I bought this house by myself, and what does that mean for my future? And so there were conflicting feelings. Please understand, it wasn't all bad. I was excited as could be. I shared the testimony over and over again of the way that the Lord brought me in here. It was a miracle in and of itself, but the transition was a grieving experience. And your transitional seasons are. With new places and new beginnings and new things comes unexpected grief. And because we're so in our heads and we so go right, wrong, good, bad, we often tell ourselves, well, I should be happy. And we don't even recognize that what's happening is that we're grieving. I remember years ago, just every day praying about being in practice full time, having my own business full time, doing grief recovery, doing coaching, doing these things. And yet, when I left the familiar, which was a job, to step into the unknown, oh, did I grieve? It was a grieving experience. The winds of change are truly here, my friend. And I feel like the Lord is putting this on my heart, because if we miss the grieving that happens in our transitions, then we can bog ourselves down unnecessarily. It's okay to experience those conflicting feelings. It's okay to know that when we step into the unknown, when we step into the journey, that the familiar, the comfortable is where we want to fight to be. And so with that change comes grief. And what is grief? Grief is just the normal and natural response to change or loss of any kind. It is so normal and natural to grieve. I remember I was on a meeting. It was a coaching meeting. And I was just sharing some of the beginning pieces of grief recovery. And there was a parent on there who just went, oh my gosh, it hit him. They have 5 children and they're moving, and they were about to move out of state. And he was surprised at the way his kids were reacting. And when I broke it all down and I was just breaking down some of the educational pieces, tears just flowed. And he went, I need to understand how to help my kids. I didn't even think about the grief that they're in. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with someone who was in a family where they moved over and over and over again, and how much they often have piled up in their backpack, because nobody recognized that all that transition, every time, it was a grieving experience. We need to get as comfortable with tears as we are with laughter. We need to get comfortable with conflicting feelings. Too many times we want to go to this right or wrong experience instead of just stepping into the reality of our heart. But there's depth in there. Yes, it's not as neat and packaged. Yes, it feels ambiguous. Yes, it's not that we stay there or get stuck there. It's that we express there, and life happens there. So many times when I go in with Jesus, that's what I call it, going in with Jesus, the waters of my heart, like it's like a garden. And that's what I want you to think about when you think about your heart, like it's like a garden. And so many times when I go in and I'm there, and it's there's all this beauty, but then it'll be like, oh, there's a rock in there. Oh, there's a weed in there. And the Lord will show me. And so it's the same, right? That backpack analogy is so important, because that's all of the stuff that gets stopped up in your heart. And the more that things get stopped up in your heart, the harder it is to transition. The harder the transition will be, and the less exciting it will be. The winds of change are truly here. The transition is here. Don't be surprised if some days you wake up feeling awesome and other days you wake up just feeling heavy. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing at all. Your heart is trying to navigate the new. And I truly believe that our original design was, even though there were adventures that Adam and Eve and their children were supposed to take, they were adventures in constant communication with the Lord. They weren't navigating, in the beginning, sin and the fall and the darkness and the obstacles and the things that we navigate today. We do get to be led by Jesus. But because of the dynamics that we live in today, we don't always have a surety. We don't always have this total assurance of where we're going. And often we have to take a step, and then the next one lights and the next one lights. And so it's very, very important that we grieve the transition, that we allow ourselves to go. The winds of change are scary. The winds of change bring conflicting feelings because all of us have something in the familiar that we want to grab onto. And when the Lord calls us out, that transition can feel scary and overwhelming, but it's time to grieve it and know that the new brings grief. And I think it's something that we need to be a lot more comfortable with. It's not a downer. It's not pessimistic. There is a significant difference between the expression of the heart and holding things in and trying to get attention on what we're holding in. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes they've been with us for a very long time. And because the heart requires witness and pain requires witness, sometimes we look for ways to gain attention to what's back there by dramatizing things in the present. That's why people do that. It's because there's still hurt and pain from back there that's undealt with. So they're dramatizing things in the present, just trying to get some kind of witness. But because it's not actually dealing with the root, the original painful experience, it ends up being a loop that they are in constantly, where they're constantly needing that attention because it's kind of like a counterfeit way to try to resolve the past without actually looking at it. Expression is different. Expression comes from kind of this idea of completion. In other words, the pain of the past has been dealt with. The pain of the past has come out. And so now because of that, I can navigate the newness of my experience in the fullness of my heart, knowing that I can express both sides of the coin, the excitement, the passion, the fear, the dread, the pain. I can express all of it. And I express it in the present because I don't want it to stop me from moving into where the Lord has me. It becomes part of my relationship with Him and part of my relationship with others, navigating the conflicting feelings that come with transition. And I have to say, as I have been in this transitional season, and I've been in this season for probably 2 or 3 years. If I look back, I can really see when it started. I remember when the Lord started speaking to me about how my business was going to change and how He was directing my purpose differently. And I heard Him. And there was a part of me that was like, okay, I'm going to release this. And then a part of me that was like, oh, what does that mean when I release this? But He's dealt with so many other things within my heart. And then on top of that, it has come with so many battles, things that I didn't expect to experience, things that came out of nowhere. I had another one that came out of nowhere earlier this year that I'll talk about later on a later podcast, because right now I want to keep things private, but it came out of the blue. And it got kind of scary, to be honest, in some ways. And I was, again, surprised and shocked. Where is this coming from? And yet, oftentimes when we're on that path and we're stepping into these greater waters and deeper waters, the enemy just goes full throttle. And it wasn't like I was really in danger, if that makes sense. I feel like the Lord's hand was moving through all of it. But in the moment, it definitely felt that way. And I could have just stayed in the fear, or I could have just said, the Lord has it. It's fine. Everything happens for a reason. It's making me stronger. Hear this. In order for things to make you stronger, you have to grieve them. When we go through a painful situation, if we circumvent the grieving process and go right to, it made me stronger, it didn't really make you stronger. You just shut down your heart more. Most of the time, when we buck up and go, that made me stronger, really what's happened is that we've just numbed ourselves out a bit more and hardened our heart a little bit more. Ultimately, down the road, that doesn't end up being a strength. Our superpower is really moving through the pain and getting to the other side, because that's what builds true resiliency. I look again at David in the Psalms. He was extraordinarily resilient. But he was not extraordinarily resilient because he just muscled through things. He was extraordinarily resilient because he was very emotionally honest. He grieved in real time. And you can see it all through the Psalms. He grieved in real time. And so because he grieved in real time, he was a very resilient man. And yes, did he do his life perfectly? Oh my goodness, no. But there's something to this, you all. There's something to being honest about the waters of your heart, being honest about the conflicting feelings, being honest about the fear to step into the unknown or how the transition may be affecting you. Getting honest with yourself is where it starts, because sometimes we don't want to be honest with ourselves about how something is truly affecting us, and then getting honest with others and getting honest with God. He knows it anyway. But there is a type of expression that leads to connection. If you find yourself circling the same mountain over and over again, in other words, almost like a similar situation keeps happening over and over, and you feel almost like stuck in that situation and stuck in the feelings of it, that may be an indicator that there's something back there that the Lord wants to heal. There's something back there that you haven't given enough voice to. And so this circle around the mountain is actually a gift to help you to get to the deeper parts of yourself if you allow it. Not always easy, but true resiliency is built on learning how to properly grieve versus bucking up and pushing through. Every time we try to just buck up and push through, ultimately it comes out some way. It comes out sideways. It's either in our health, it comes out in our attitude. What'll happen over time is that we can get this very kind of edgy, kind of grumpy attitude that just stays with us. And I'm not down on anybody for that. Sometimes it's the only thing we have. Another one is anxiety will rise and rise and rise. And anxiety is a symptom. And I know it's something that we talk a lot about, I feel like, in our society, things like anxiety and depression. But what we often miss is that anxiety, depression, they're symptoms of a deeper issue. And a lot of times what it boils down to is that unresolved grief is at the root, and we haven't dealt with the root. And the other thing that I find happens in transition is that if there are pieces that we haven't really grieved, life is not easy sometimes. We know that, Jesus came to give us life and life to the full, but it comes with persecutions. It comes with really hard stuff. And if we don't embrace the idea of grieving, and if we don't embrace the idea of healing through our experiences, they tend to pile up. And eventually, they will come and they will come out in some way. It was really interesting. I was leading this training, and there was this person, and they'd had this health issue that had been with them for a very long time. And they'd gone to doctors, and they just felt like, I don't want to just take medication to take it. I want to understand what's causing this. And nobody could help them. And after doing and walking through the process of being able to release some really deep emotional pain, that health issue completely resolved. And so that is often why I believe the Lord leads us to these deeper places, and why he allows us to be in this transitional process for a lengthy time, because he's helping us to not only grieve the transition, because we need to do that, but also to help us if there's anything underneath that we haven't fully dealt with. It's an opportunity. Life is impactful. I don't think it's healthy for us to walk around acting as though we're unaffected by things. That isn't humanity. That isn't your heart. That isn't your being. That isn't how you were created. We are affected, you all. That is part of life. We're affected by life. It's impactful. You can always find somebody who has a tougher story than you, but that doesn't take away from the story that you have and had. And not only that, life is impactful both ways. Some of the transition is also being able to embrace the rejoicing. But you can't embrace the rejoicing if you keep carrying the rocks with you. We'll numb it all out. And you are not meant to live that way. And people are not drawn to somebody who's dulled down. They're drawn to somebody who's lit up inside. And sometimes, man, I'll tell you all, I hear a lot of really tough stories. I do. Some really painful, difficult stories. I'm not making light of anyone's situation. Life is sometimes very, very hard and very painful. And there is another side to the pain. And a lot of times we can understand the really hard story, but we don't always realize that in transition, there's grief. And if we don't acknowledge it, we might carry it with us, and that'll weigh us down in our next season. So I want to encourage you. I want you to take this as an encouragement. I want you to really look at your life, look at what has been happening, look at where things have been changing or moving, because I know so many people have been in this very big transition. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's emotional, spiritual, vocational, relational. It's just a different season. The things that I know for me in this season, it was like the things that I was used to grabbing onto in the old season, they just weren't there, if that makes sense. Like they weren't there to grab onto. And I felt like I was grabbing for things that normally I could anchor into, and they just weren't there. And yes, are we always supposed to anchor into Jesus? Absolutely. But we also live in the natural world. And so, of course, there are also things that we do want to grab onto. And every time I would go to grab onto something, it was like, it's not there. And this needed to happen. And this is part of transitioning. But I had to, and still am in process of grieving that familiar, grieving this transition. And to be honest, here's something really interesting, you all. As I'm starting to I've been starting to come out of the tight season, and I'm starting to move into, I believe, the season that the Lord has for me. I'm starting to move into it. It isn't happening quite as quickly as I think it should, because that's me. But I will tell you, at the same time, I have already been realizing I don't want to release this season, this transition, where things have been really pared down, because there's come a point in time where I've gotten so content with the paring down and that's above me. There's nothing I can do about it, that I'm almost sad to see it go. I'm conflicted, and that's all part of the journey, and it's all part of the process. And I'm okay with that. And you should be too. It's okay to grab onto life and know that our experience and our journey and the things that we walk to matter. They matter so much. And so just know that God loves you. He sees you. He sees every step that you're taking. He's with you in every struggle. He's with you in every disappointment. He's with you in every victory. He's with you in the uncertainty. And it's quite all right if you are wrestling. It's quite all right if you are grieving, and know that that transition is bringing grief, and it's okay to grieve. I just read a book called Unraveled, and it's a really, really great book. And it's all about this. I started reading it and I went, okay, God is so speaking to me. Sometimes we get unraveled in order to be built back up into where we need to be. There's grief that comes with that. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry out. It's okay that even in the new, even in the new thing, there will be grief. And it's okay to express the conflicting experiences emotionally that come with grieving. So I just want to thank you for tuning in. And I want to encourage you to embrace your heart. We are so needed out there, you all. And your heart is paramount to your experience relationally with Jesus and with others. And it matters. And the waters of your heart have such amazing meaning. So thank you. I do ask that you share this. I do feel like there's so many people out there that don't realize that that change has brought grief, and they're in grief and they don't realize it. And it's on top of other unresolved grief. And so they're sitting there, right? They're distracting themselves. They're feeling anxious or depressed. They're out of the moment. They're having overreactions, or feeling really edgy, or having unexplained health issues, or isolating, or feeling stuck, or having trouble trusting. They're having all of these symptoms, not realizing that it's grief unaddressed. So if someone comes to mind, please share this with them. The more that we navigate the waters of our heart, the more depth that we get to experience with others, but most importantly, with our Lord and Savior. Sending you all my love, and be blessed.